Yesterday we had the Iron Bowl and Alabama winning 28-14, and that makes 5 wins in a row for the Crimson Tide against the Auburn Tigers. We're going to talk about that and the rest of what happened around the country on Rivalry Weekend on this episode of the Pigskin Cafe.
Welcome to the Pigskin Cafe, a podcast where Hampton, Chase, and Graham break down all things college football. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
They have to win this game.
There's a problem. This one's tough.
We are back.
That's what my gut's telling me.
I genuinely could not believe it.
You don't live in the great state of Texas.
All right, big boy.
Oh, my sweet tea.
What are we doing?
That is a stat there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back into the Pigskin Cafe. My name is Hampton Sipper, and I am joined by Mr. Graham Haney. Chase cannot join us today, unfortunately, but we're going to have a chock-full episode recapping the Alabama versus Auburn game, the Iron Bowl, and briefly hit on a few of the big other games from across the country. But before we dive into that, I want to tell everybody we appreciate you listening so much. It's been great to see how our audience has grown this season. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button here on YouTube. Leave us a like, leave us a comment, and hit that notification bell. And be sure to follow us on social media. We're coming to the end of the college football season, but in a lot of ways, it's just beginning with the playoffs right around the corner. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow us as we kind of break down the rest of the college football season. But Graham, let's dive into the Iron Bowl. Alabama wins 28-14 against a very pedestrian, very mediocre Auburn team. It marks the 5th win in a row for the Crimson Tide, the longest streak since 1973 to 1982, where Alabama won 9 in a row. And before I kind of get your thoughts, I'm going to give some brief overall thoughts on the offense. Start on that side of the ball. I thought this game kind of encapsulated what the whole season has been like. There was some good, there was some bad, and there was just some plain flat out ugly. And I think that has really been the story of the Alabama Crimson Tide this whole year. I thought what really, really stood out to me from the jump was there was a commitment to the running game. And what I mean by a commitment to the running game, I mean utilizing the running backs in a way that really Alabama has not done for the majority of the year. I mean, I'm looking at the box score right now. Jalen Milroe had 28 carries in this game. 28. He probably hadn't had that many in the past 3 or 4 games combined. Or it definitely doesn't seem like he has. So I think after the Oklahoma game, again, the brass at Alabama came together internally and said, we cannot give Jalen Milroe the option to keep it as much as we have been in the past. Because you really saw in the first half against Oklahoma, he wasn't making the correct read, and it was putting Alabama behind the chains. So this week, and in the second half of last week, they completely took that away and took that off his plate and were really committed to running the ball. And while Alabama wasn't ultra successful running the ball with their running backs, I appreciated the commitment to it. It honestly, in a lot of ways, was like 3 yards in a cloud of dust. But I think eventually it wore on Auburn more and more as the game went along. Now, that is not to say that they did not utilize Jalen Milroe in the running game at all. They definitely did, but I thought a lot of that was more designed runs, kind of like what they did versus LSU, where he fakes the ball to the running back, then the running back kind of becomes the lead blocker. There were a couple, I think at least one of his touchdowns came off a play like that. And I think that is kind of what needs to happen going forward. I think that is what gives Alabama the best chance to win. And ultimately, it led to a lot of success yesterday. I thought, let's talk about Jalen Milroe and his performance real quick. I thought he played much better than he did versus Oklahoma, which isn't saying much, but he did. He looked a lot more comfortable. I think part of that had to do with how Auburn was playing him. I was very surprised when Alabama got in third and long situations. Instead of blitzing him and pressuring him, a lot of the time they would only rush 3 and they'd have a spy, or even sometimes it looked like they had 2 spies on him to make sure that he didn't escape from the pocket. And really, that plays into making him comfortable and not speeding up his internal clock. So as an Alabama fan, I was happy that Auburn employed that game plan, but I was kind of surprised to see that from them. I thought he did a lot better job of throwing the football and distributing it. Thought Jeremy Bernard had a really, really good game. Kind of showed what he can be next year in a hopefully more efficient passing offense kind of going forward if there's a new quarterback at the helm. I thought he played really well. I thought Ryan Williams might have played his worst game of the year. I mean, Jalen Milroe made arguably his best throw of the year to him. It was at least his best throw in weeks, and Ryan dropped it. And he fumbled on the first drive of the game. Thought a very up and down day, very uncharacteristic game from him that needs to improve going forward. But again, I heard this said on another podcast. We joke all the time about he's only 17 years old. Well, he is only 17 years old, and he's going to make those type of mistakes. But when you drop a ball like that, that's a concentration thing to me. That isn't a DB making a play. That's just you simply losing focus. So very up and down day for him. Thought the tight ends played well. C.J. Dupree, Josh Cuevas, they were utilized a good bit on a lot of those angle routes, kind of to give Jalen Milroe quick answers for when, Auburn would, in the rare case, send an additional guy, could get the ball out quick. I thought that was a good adjustment. And ultimately, like I said, I thought he ran the ball pretty well. There were times, obviously, that Jalen Milroe was going to do what Jalen Milroe does, which means he's not going to put his foot in the ground north and south and get the tough yard. He's going to try to run the sideline and outrun people. It's frustrating. It's maddening. But guess what? It is what it is at this point. The turnovers, the first interception he threw, terrible. You're throwing it into quadruple coverage and you throw it high. Just can't happen. I mean, it's a three-man rush. Can't happen. But again, I made a vow on this podcast last week, and I made a vow to my family that if he made a mistake this week, I wasn't going to get all up in arms. I expected at this point. It is what it is. The two fumbles he had, terrible. I know I can somewhat defend the Caden Proctor one. It was from his blind side. I get that. But the one where he got tracked down from behind, that was just plain bad, Graham. I mean, he needs to put his foot in the ground, go get the first down instead of being hesitant. And even with that, there's no way you should have better ball security to not be stripped from behind like that. So overall, I thought he played a better game, but it was a lot of good, a lot of bad. Kind of what he's been all year and what he's been throughout his career. And last note before I kind of get your thoughts on the offense, I found it hilarious because it really seemed like this game, more Alabama fans on Twitter were like, it was like their eyes were being open to Jalen Milroe can't run the read option well, and Jalen Milroe's not seeing the field well, and all this kind of stuff, and that they were finally tired of watching this type of performance from an Alabama quarterback. And I'm like, guys, where you been? Like, this has been baked into the cake for quite a while now. And ultimately, I'm glad Alabama got the win. I thought, again, he played better, but he is who he is at this point. So, Graham, what are your thoughts on the Alabama offense? Was there anything that stood out to you that I didn't cover that you want to kind of make mention of?
Yeah, I think when you look back at the Iron Bowl, first off, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Hope you had a great holiday weekend. I'm assuming you probably listen to this back at work, but back to normal. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I think that the Iron Bowl is always a good culmination of everything you had to be thankful for, because it could all change based. It's one of those things where if you're an Alabama fan, you could have the best Thanksgiving ever, and if Alabama loses, it's all for naught. If this all for it's all great and all glory, and the same can be said for Auburn fans as well. For Alabama's offense, since that's what we're talking about, I really liked that they committed to spreading out the run game. You talked this a lot, so I'm not going to hammer it too much. Jalen Milroe got 28 attempts for 84 yards, so an average of 3 yards, which isn't fantastic, but it does open up more lanes for Milroe to run, which is what he is better at than throwing the ball. And so being able to spread out defenses, making it where it's not easy for them to predict who's going to run the ball. Whereas we look back last week, Oklahoma, stacked the box and they had all lanes closed, and Oklahoma played like their head was on fire, and Alabama played out. Alabama played like they were soft, like they were ice cold, like they had no expectation of winning. But it was nice for Alabama to come back home and at least get some things back moving in the right direction. Like you said, wish Ryan Williams would have secured that deep ball as well. Lack of focus, dropped that one. But I think the biggest takeaway I have, and we'll talk about it more later in the podcast, is still Alabama turning the football over. I think if you look at the caliber team that Auburn was playing, halfway decent team capitalizes on at least 2 of those turnovers. Not even to say all 4. Not a good day for turnovers for Alabama, which was somewhat concerning. It wasn't like we couldn't get anything going. It was like we would get something going in the right direction, and then we'd fumble and we'd turn the ball over. And 4 of those, 3 of the fumbles, and 1 was on Milroe. So you can't have that. When you look at the fumble that Ryan Williams had, to me that was a little bit more understanding. Getting tackled and just hits the player before he hits the ground, and then it pops out. So a little more understanding, but we got to be more secure with the ball, especially the last regular season game of the year. Some of those minuscule plays where we're just not holding on to the ball tight can't happen. If this team wants to make it any further than they have so far. But overall, after how awful and just how abysmal last week was at Oklahoma, at least we got something going. It's not to say that everything was great and that Alabama played their best game, because they did not, but at least we were moving back in the right direction, which was encouraging as an Alabama fan.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that assessment, Graham. What's crazy to me is, I think the point that you made about if you turn the ball over 4 times against a halfway decent team, more than likely it isn't going to end well for you. And really, that final turnover, the fumble that Milroe had where he got stripped from behind, I thought Alabama was going to be in real trouble on that, because Auburn got the ball in Alabama territory, and all I have to say is thank goodness Hugh Freeze caught a double pass with his running back instead of just playing traditional offense, and they called it, and my guy Bray Hubbard picked the ball off. So any other team, they're not calling that in that situation. You cut it to 1 score, then all the pressure's on Alabama. And in the past 2 games against 2 mediocre teams, Alabama's turned the ball over 7 times. It's inexcusable. But speaking of turnovers, Alabama's defense caused a couple as well. Xavier Brown got a pick. Bray Hubbard got the pick that I mentioned. Graham, what did you make of the defensive performance for the Tide? And I'll say this. Talk about it in the context of this game, but overall, what would you say about the Alabama defense this year? What do you think as far as how far they come? Are they a really good unit? Kind of what your general thoughts on them?
Yeah, I think the first aspect you got to talk about Iron Bowl was just how off rhythm Auburn was. It seemed the whole game. Auburn, traditionally and as consistent with Hugh Freeze's offense, is better running the ball than they are throwing the ball. Well, they had 23 carries, and Peyton Thorne had 41 pass attempts. Well, I know you're playing from behind, but that's not a winning formula for Auburn in any aspect. When you compare it to Alabama, we had over 50 attempts on the ground, which is a substantial. And I guess you could, if you were to base it off statistics alone, since the triple option is not working its way out of college football, but not as prevalent um, in the modern age. Teams that typically run the ball more usually win, consistent that they're controlling the clock, are able to be more physical in the line of scrimmage to wear down opposing defenses. So I think obviously you got to take the defensive performance with a grain of salt, knowing that this Auburn team is not talented. This Auburn team is just not very good. I mean, we're not going to sit here and try and
sugarcoat it.
Well, yeah, we're not going to sugarcoat it. We're going to try and be as unbiased as possible. We're Alabama fans and will admit that. But this Auburn team has not been good. I mean, you look at their schedule. The only competent team that they beat all year was Texas A&M at home, which was a good win. Don't get me wrong, but then you didn't really beat anybody else that was worth much of anything. So you can't look and say Auburn didn't play very good this game. In comparison to everything else, Auburn hasn't been very good, so they didn't play very good. Alabama's defense, I think that something that I don't even know if we've mentioned on the podcast yet, but at least it's worth bringing up. I don't know if this unit, this 4-2-5 scheme, will ever, well, at least this year, will be a great unit because Kalen DeBoer comes in, Ken Womack comes in. As they enter, they're only able to get transfers from Washington and from Arizona. I guess you could say we're the only schools.
And Michigan.
In Michigan, that's right, in Michigan. So you're looking to replace those that you lost last year, to change schemes completely, and to fill those gaps with people and with players from only those handful of teams. And I don't know if any of them ran the 4-2-5 scheme like Womack likes to run. So I do think there's a ceiling for this defense because you do have players that are just, they don't have any choice, but they're playing in a position that maybe they're not comfortable. I'm not going to say they're playing out of position, but a position in which they're not probably best suited for the scheme. However, we've seen bright spots from this defense, but we've also seen very much low points for sure. I think that the biggest up and down aspect of this Alabama defense has been their at least willingness to rush one on third down. We're not going to say they're going to engage 8 like you would on college football 20 or any of the other games back in the day. But when it's third and medium, third and long, Alabama is going to put 6 people on the line of scrimmage, back those cornerbacks and safeties up, and almost dare you to throw it fast, which is boom or bust because you can't get the quarterback. You can force errant throws. You can require the defense to change plays, which we saw a lot in the LSU game. They would change to a different play, and Alabama wasn't bringing everybody, so they were able to adapt. But overall, I feel like the Alabama's defense played fairly well, especially considering they had so many short fields that were given up, and the ability to only give up one touchdown, I think says a lot. I also want to you know how up and down and how crazy Auburn's season has been when even their kicker's not very good. Auburn has had issues all year, which is something that Auburn fans they have not been able to say. They cannot relate like Alabama fans can relate to having a bad kicker. With having both the Carlson brothers and McPherson last year, I guess he's been hurt this year. So they've had very talented kickers for the last decade at least, which for Auburn fans that you talk to, well, hey, it doesn't matter. Run the ball, field goal, boom, we score. Whereas this year they haven't been able to rely on that. Their field goal kickers have been inconsistent, which is something that Auburn fans probably noticed, but may not necessarily acknowledge. Kind of set the tone for the game. Alabama doesn't score the first touchdown. Auburn drives the field and goes to kick the first field goal game and misses. So I think for Auburn, that was kind of their last chance. Credit Alabama's defense for coming in clutch. But then again, got to take it with a grain of salt. I mean, you played better against a team that's not very good. What can you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all of that is a very fair assessment of the Alabama defense. And I will say this coming into the year, I think every Alabama fan would tell you the offense was going to have to carry this team, especially early, because Alabama fans recognized that you lost both your starting corners in Kool-Aid and Terrion. You lost Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. You lost Caleb Downs, who was an All-American type of safety. You lost a lot. You lost a guy like Justin Aboigbe, who's playing on the Chargers right now, who is a really good defensive lineman. 6 key pieces off of your defense, and you're replacing a lot of them with a transfer in Dominique Jackson, who we haven't talked about enough this year. Dude has been phenomenal. Like, literal lockdown type corner. Like, teams rarely throw at him because he has been so good in coverage. And not only that, I think he's been good in run support. Like, he's been a very physical type of player. But then you got Xavier Brown, who's a freshman. Keon Sabb, before he got hurt, he had not had a whole lot of experience playing. I mean, he played at Michigan, but he wasn't just a starter through and through. He had a limited role. Then he gets hurt. Then Bray Hubbard comes in. Then Devontae Smith, who has been at Alabama a lot, but he's a young guy. He comes in and plays. So you had a lot of youth and inexperience. And then you talked about Graham. You lose some of those pieces, and you lose a guy like Caleb Downs, and you can only supplement them with transfers from 3 schools in January. You're transferring and going to a new scheme. And what happened with that unit? They allowed the lowest point per game total at Alabama since 2017, with 17 points allowed per game. That's pretty doggone impressive by Kane Womack and company. With, again, the transitioning between schemes, the amount of players you lost, the youth and inexperience that you had to employ, especially in that back end, that is really, really impressive. And that gives me, as an Alabama fan, hope about the future, that he's going to be able to build on this first year, because a lot of these guys who were thrown in the fire this year are going to be able to come back next year, have more confidence in what they're being asked to do, have more experience under their belt, and I think ultimately you're going to be a really, really good unit. I mean, a guy like Quay Russaw got valuable experience this year. I think he's going to be a terror next year at that Wolf position. Yanze Pierre got into the game yesterday, another young player. There's a lot of young players along that defensive line. I think with the cards that they were dealt, they weren't the problem on the team this year. That, in my opinion, they were a stronger unit than the offense in a lot of ways. They were much more dependable. Again, I talked about the points per game allowed, and a lot of other metrics. They were better than even the defense last year. And in every game except, I believe, Vanderbilt, they forced a turnover this year in SEC play. So that is one thing that is a pillar of the Swarm D that Kane Womack likes to employ, is taking the ball back from the opposing offense and giving it to your offense. They did that in spades this year. So my assessment of this unit, I mean, I give them probably like a B plus to an A minus. I think the coaching job that was done on that side of the ball, especially after how bad that Vanderbilt game was, the continued improvement week to week, I thought was sensational, and it gets me really excited about the future and about what they can do going forward. My last note on the game itself, Hugh Freeze went 5-7 this year with a more talented roster than he had last year. A lot of that has to do with him tying his cart to Peyton Thorne again when he knew what Peyton Thorne was. But I think more than that, if I'm an Auburn fan, this is what I'm concerned about. You watched what Oklahoma did to Alabama last week in that first half. You saw what Jarquez Hunter did on the first couple drives of the game. And then even when, I know you talked about like it's hard to run the ball when you're down, but even when the margin, the score margin or score differential was, it was 7-3, it was 14-3, 14-6, Auburn refused to run the ball. Hugh Freeze would call 3 straight pass plays with Peyton Thorne as your quarterback. Like, I don't understand that philosophy. And, you can say all you want, like, well, we need a guy at that position. And I'm not disagreeing. You absolutely do. But no quarterback, unless he's, Tua Tagovailoa or, Shador Sanders or Cam Ward, guys of that caliber. And even then, I wouldn't want to call 41 pass plays to however many rushes they had when you have a type of back the caliber of Jarquez Hunter. And then you call that trick play with Jarquez Hunter, and then after the game you come out and criticize him because he should have thrown it to Peyton Thorne. Like, what are we doing? And then my last little tidbit, I love that anytime Hugh Freeze loses, he's going to bring up recruiting in that post-game presser, man. He's going to talk about, these young guys that we got, and, we're going to sign the best class that we can of high school guys this upcoming Wednesday. Even if they go 5-7 again next year, it's going to be the same old song and verse. Just keep pointing to that recruiting. And eventually, if the product on the field doesn't match what you're doing off of it, those boosters are going to grow very weary of that same old talk. And then I know, last thing I'll say, and then we can kind of transition to the next part of our show. I can't believe that there was not a flag on Auburn when the whole sideline scuffle went down. I get calling it on Devontae Smith and Malachi Moore. I get it. But Auburn instigated that. Keandre Lambert-Smith is the guy who blocked Devontae Smith into the Auburn bench, then wouldn't let go, and then the whole Auburn team surrounds them, and they're the two that get flagged. Just a further confirmation that SEC officiating is a joke, not just for Alabama, across the conference. It's a complete disaster, and Greg Sankey needs to get the gumption to address it in the offseason because it's costing people games, and it's a poor mark on what is an otherwise very prestigious conference. But Graham, enough about the Iron Bowl. Great win for Alabama, 5 in a row, going for 6 next year. Let's talk about the playoff and the implications of it. I'm gonna give my take, and then I want you to react. And Finn apparently wants to give his take as well. Alabama is 9-3 at this point, and there are a lot of Alabama fans out there that are going to hate this segment of the show. They're going to hate what I have to say, and that's okay. It's what's beautiful about America, the marketplace of ideas. Alabama right now in the AP poll is sitting at number 11. And there are many fans that think that Alabama deserves to slide in to that final slot to get into the playoff. And ladies and gentlemen, I love the Alabama Crimson Tide. I love them. And in 2017 and in 2023, and even to a degree in 2022, even though they had lost 2 games, I argued that they should be in the playoff, that they were deserving of the playoff. I can't make that argument this year. And I know everyone wants to point to, well, Alabama beat Georgia. They did beat Georgia. But let's look at the context of that game. Because I think just looking at the simple W and L next to every game is disingenuous. Alabama got up 28-0 quick, but they also almost lost that game. And if not for a Herculean effort by Ryan Williams, they would have lost that game. They basically played a quarter and a half of great football against Georgia. And I hate to tell everyone, and again, it's hypothetical, 100%. The games are played for a reason. But I think if Alabama played Georgia tomorrow, I'm sorry, I think Georgia would beat Alabama right now. I do. But that is what I keep hearing is let's point to this win against Georgia. That is like the North Star of why Alabama should get in. But Alabama fans don't want to talk about the 3 losses. Again, losing to Tennessee, understandable. but you lost to a 6-6 Vanderbilt team, and you got embarrassed. You didn't just lose to Oklahoma; you got embarrassed 24-3 to a 6-6 Oklahoma team that has no offense. And that same Oklahoma team went on the road to LSU last night and got beat 34-17. So you can't tell me that. I've heard some people use the argument, well, if Vanderbilt and Oklahoma were like in the Big 12 or if they were in the ACC, they only have 2 or 3 losses. I don't know about that one, Chief. I don't know about that. And the same argument has been used for, well, SMU beats up on 6-6 teams, or Indiana has beat up on a bunch of 7-5 teams. Okay, well, at least they beat them. Alabama lost to 6-6 teams. Not only that, but in the past 2 games, you turned the ball over 7 times. Auburn, you didn't play well. You didn't play well against Auburn. If you wanted to show the committee that we're one of the best 12 teams, you should have come out and blown Auburn off the field yesterday. But you didn't, because you are a very flawed football team. And again, there are flawed teams all across the country. There is no elite team this year. I 100% will give you that caveat. But in my opinion, when you lose to teams of that caliber, I can't defend you tooth and nail and say that you deserve to be invited for a chance to win a national championship. I can't. If Alabama's 3 losses came versus Georgia, Tennessee, and then throw in maybe Missouri, I can make an argument that Alabama should be in, possibly. But I can't right now. And if I think Alabama fans were being truthful, I think they got a defense good enough to compete with anybody in the country. But offensively, we've seen what has happened when Alabama has gone against an elite defensive unit. It hadn't gone very well. And that has been not only a this year thing, that's been a years in the past thing. And again, I get years in the past, like last year, does not have any precedent for this year. But, another talking point is South Carolina. I know that both South Carolina and Alabama had the same record and that Alabama beat South Carolina. But I think there needs to be context added to South Carolina. They lost to LSU because their quarterback got hurt in that game. They were cruising against LSU before Lenore Sellers got hurt. And then the refs screwed them on a call, and if that hadn't happened, they'd have won that game. So to me, that loss seems to be looked differently than other losses they've incurred. And even when they were a 20-point underdog to Alabama. They lost by 2. And again, Lenore Sellers, even in that game, was banged up coming in, and it was doubtful, or it was up in the air if he was even going to play or not. Since he's been healthy, they have won 6 straight games, and they have looked like one of the best teams in the country. And they're a team that I don't care who you are, you would not want to play right now with their defense and with how that kid is blossoming into an absolute bona fide star. If they got put in over Alabama, I get that Alabama has the head-to-head. But they're playing better than Alabama right now. They are. I'm sorry to everybody out there, to every Alabama fan. If the committee decided to put South Carolina in and they use that LSU game as Lenore Sellers getting hurt, that they look at that loss differently than Alabama's 3, I get it. And guess what? Their 3 losses are to LSU, Alabama, and Ole Miss. Not to Vandy and Oklahoma and Tennessee. Those are different, and they should be looked at differently. And whatever happens, if Alabama gets in, I will support them. I will root for them. But I am not going to use this platform to get on here and just be King Gump and stump for them to get in, because in a hypothetical world, I think they're better than Indiana, or I think they're better than SMU. I don't know that, because I thought they were better than Vanderbilt and I thought they were better than Oklahoma, and they lost both of those games. So you can't tell me just because they'd line up and play and you think they'd win that they would. because they have already shown and proven this year that there's no guarantee with this team. And ultimately, if they don't get in, it is their own fault. So, Graham, react to that. Give me your thoughts on whether Alabama should be in or out of this 12-team playoff field.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. I would love Alabama to make the playoff, and I would be very excited if they did. But results have to matter. The outcome of football games have to matter. When you look at Alabama, and Hampton, you said, we have two bad, capital B, bad losses this year. I mean, you can look at it and say Notre Dame has one as well. That is fine. There are several teams in this the top 15, the top 12, that are into making the college football playoff that have a bad loss. However, results have to matter. If Alabama, not saying if Alabama wanted to make the playoffs, they should have won, because obviously they did want to make the playoff and they did want to win. I think the precedent that would kind of take place if you put in a 3-loss Alabama team over, a team like
Miami.
Or Miami, or Ohio State, or something like that. When you look at that, I think it sets a bad precedent, because then you're saying it doesn't matter who you lose to as long as you beat somebody good.
Mm-hmm.
When in the end, we can't. Yes, we think Alabama is better than Indiana, and if you want to make the discussion that there's 20 teams that are better than Indiana, we can have that talk, and we'll probably both say that that's probably right. But you can't control who your schedule is. When you kick off that first game of the year, you don't get to change your opponents. You don't get to change who you're scheduled to play in conference. But if you go 11-1 against anybody, that's a good outcome. It is hard to win in college football. It does not matter the level. It does not matter if you're in Conference USA, the Sun Belt, Mountain West, SEC, Big 12, ACC, Big 10, Pac-12. It doesn't matter. Well, excuse me, Pac-2. It doesn't matter. Winning is hard. Winning takes grit. And when you look at the teams that are making up this top 12 area, you have one undefeated team in Oregon. You have several one-loss teams, several two-loss teams. But when you look at the teams that have 1 and 2 losses, outside of Notre Dame, okay, Notre Dame has a bad loss to Northern Illinois, okay?
Week 2 of the season.
In week 2, okay? When Boise State lost to Oregon, okay? That's a good loss.
And they kept it close.
Yeah.
I mean, they lost by 7, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was something like it was a good loss. You look at Indiana losses to Ohio State. Yes, Ohio State just lost to Michigan, but rivalry games are intense. Rivalry games are on a different level. Michigan play for, and Ohio State just I don't know. Another discussion for another day. But you look at these teams, and I mean, yeah, there are SEC teams beating up against SEC teams. There's Big Ten teams beating up against Big Ten teams, but results have to matter. When you look up and down this list, the 2-loss teams, one of their losses is at least a good loss. When you look at the 2-loss teams, you look at Georgia with 2 losses. I mean, two good losses. One to Alabama, which was honestly a fluke when we look back at the season, and then you look and they play Ole Miss on the road. So Georgia lost 2 road games in 2 tough environments. That's a better discussion to have than, Alabama beat Georgia but also lost to Vanderbilt and lost to Tennessee and lost to Oklahoma. If Alabama doesn't lose to Oklahoma, the discussion is completely changed, as if it would be Alabama should be in if the committee knew what they were doing. But right now, you can't boost the eye test over the results test. If you just say that Alabama looks better than Indiana because they played harder teams, that can't really stand. That doesn't have that much weight, considering that Alabama has the same opportunity to win all of its games the way that Indiana had the same opportunity to win all theirs. Okay, if you go 11-1, you go 12-0. Not saying it completely doesn't matter who you play, but winning is winning regardless of the level. Okay, especially in this 12-team playoff matchup, this bracket, we know that one group of 5 teams is going to make it. And if Boise State's 11-1 and their only loss is to Oregon, that's a good team. It doesn't matter if they play middle of Utah State or middle of Alabama A&M or who knows. Okay, it doesn't matter if that's who you play. If you only have 1 loss and you're in this level, you're a good football team. And if it was the discussion of, oh, Boise State has 2 or 3 losses, or SMU has 3 losses or 2 losses or whatever, then the discussion is different. But 3 losses is too many to sit here and say and argue that team should be considered a national championship contender. Okay, that's just as simple as it is. You lose one game, people have bad games. You lose 2 games, you could have one bad game and one bad situation. You can blame one of them on a call. But when Alabama lost 2 games the way they did, getting dominated by Vanderbilt and dominated by Oklahoma, there's no more discussion that needs to be had. Alabama should not make the college football playoff. Hampton, you and I are both Alabama fans. We want Alabama to make it. But we're also realists. We know that this team is not up to caliber. This team is not up to par for that national championship level.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the last thing I'll say, and then I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah.
I also, part of me doesn't want Alabama to make it for this one reason. If Alabama can lose 3 games in Caleb DeBoer's first year and still make the playoff, then we kind of get content with, okay, it's all right to lose a few. It's okay as long as you win 1 or 2 good games, then it's okay. I think for Alabama, it would be better for Alabama to lose, Alabama to not make this playoff, knowing they have more to prove next year, than to barely eke by and then get dominated on the road at Penn State or at Ohio State or whoever they would go to. Because obviously they would be on the road somewhere. The Alabama could go in there and win it. They do have the talent to do that. But as an Alabama fan, I think it would be better if Alabama did not make the playoff this year, so that they can have more motivation. So they know they have pressure. They know they've got to lock in more. They can't wait till week 7 to decide that the little things matter. Because if you decide the little things matter in spring training and in spring practice and spring ball, then you've already lost the year.
Mm-hmm. I agree with all that, Graham. And another argument that I've heard people say is, well, Alabama's strength of schedule, that should matter. And I totally agree that strength of schedule should matter. There's no doubt about that. And again, Alabama's played a much more difficult schedule than a team like SMU. 100%.
Yeah.
But are we really going to penalize SMU and say that they don't deserve to get in the playoff because they're playing in an extra game if they lose to Clemson?
Yeah.
When their only loss is by 3 to BYU, but they handled their business the rest of the way, that doesn't seem fair to me. Especially, again, when Alabama's 2 of their 3 losses are to 6-win teams. We're not having this argument. Graham and I are not on the side of Alabama doesn't deserve to be in. If the 3 losses are very similar and comparable to South Carolina's, then we can use the strength of schedule argument. We 100% can, but you can't use it when you lost to 2 mediocre teams. And, look, SMU, their schedule was definitely full of mediocre teams. No doubt about it. But guess what? They handled their business. Go ahead, Graham.
And SMU's one loss was on the road, and I think they lost like 19-16, so 3 points. So it was a field goal game. It was close. Like 2 more plays, one way or the other, SMU wins that ball game. I think when you look at it, Alabama was a lot further away than 2 plays, 5 plays, 6 plays away from being 11-1 or 12-0. You got absolutely dismantled by Oklahoma, and you got beat pretty bad by Vanderbilt. I think when you look at it, like we said, the results have to matter. Yes, you can't control your own strength of schedule. You can only play the teams you're scheduled to play. But if you take care of business, that's what matters. If you don't take care of business, you can't blame people for getting up. You can't blame people for deciding on other metrics when you don't handle your own business. If Alabama was 11-1 and we were having this discussion and Alabama didn't make playoffs, there would be heat there. There would definitely be an argument to be had. But you have 3 losses. There's not much argument to be had that is actually reasonable and will carry an argument that has merit. Like I said, an argument that had substantial merit.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. And, we talk about Miami too. All right, Miami doesn't have a signature win, but they don't have awful losses. Georgia Tech has 7-5, but Georgia Tech would probably have 2 less losses if Haynes King had not got hurt in the middle of the year. And we saw what they did to Georgia. They should have beat Georgia. They should have beat them. So even them, they played a pretty mediocre schedule, but guess what? For the most part, they took care of business, and they didn't have that just crippling, awful loss like Alabama did. And I'll close with this. Last year, the argument was Alabama and Florida State, right? Alabama had one loss, Florida State had none. And guess what? In that argument, strength of schedule mattered because Alabama lost to Texas, who ultimately went to the playoff and had only lost one game at the very end of it, at the very end of the game in a rivalry game last year. That's the difference, everyone, is strength of schedule could be used in that scenario. It should not be used here because of who you lost to. And I'm sorry that I know some people are going to say, "Oh, you're not a true Alabama fan if you're not stumping for the Tide to get in." I try to call it like I see it, and I'm not going to put on the crimson colored glasses, say that Alabama deserves something that they do not. And last year, there were plenty of people who said Alabama didn't deserve it, and I stumped hard for them because I thought they deserved a shot to go win a national championship. This year, they do not, and I'm telling you right now, if they get in year one of this 12 team expanded playoff, it shows that they made a huge mistake of expanding it to 12 teams because a mediocre, and Alabama's not mediocre, but a very flawed team in Alabama who lost to two mediocre teams should have no shot of playing for a national title. And again, I'm sorry if that hurts, but that's the way it is. Graham, you have any more or any final thoughts on the playoff argument?
The bet has already been made. You just got to decide whether you're going to sleep in it or fight against it. I mean, I think that's the whole argument. I mean, it's already been settled. Alabama chance, and they blew it. As simple as that. I mean, you can't. We can't argue that Alabama can win the national championship and should be given the chance to win the national championship if they've lost to 2 6-6 teams. Yes, here. I mean, they have improved substantially. But you look at what Tennessee did to them on Saturday. Vanderbilt got up early. Same thing with what happened against Alabama. But what did Tennessee do? Tennessee ended up dominating the rest of the game and ended up only giving up 3 points after that. 134-17, something like that.
36-23.
36-23. Excuse me. But when you look at those big punches that Vanderbilt made, Alabama did respond well. Tennessee responded well.
Mm-hmm.
That just shows itself right there. Oklahoma, I mean, the quarterback play's been terrible, and Alabama made their quarterback, I mean, probably the NCAA player of the week. I mean, 400 rushing yards, exaggerated, but was tearing up Alabama. We can argue that Alabama's a good team, but we cannot and we should not argue that Alabama should be in the college football playoff with 3 losses and 2 of them being not very good. 2 of them being bad. Just simple as that. 6-6 is not good college football anymore. 6-6 is average. And we're not going to sit here and say those are average losses because Alabama's at a different level than Vanderbilt is completely, and is at a different level currently than Oklahoma is.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Fire away in the comments if you disagree, and I'm sure there will be plenty that do. And again, I've heard other people's perspectives, and I get them. I understand them. But in this case, in this year, I don't believe that Alabama deserves to play for a national championship. But we will find out a lot on Tuesday night when the rankings come out. Because if Miami is over Alabama, which again I think they should be, then we'll have our answer whether Alabama's going to get into the playoff or not. But before we get out of here, Graham, I did want to make mention. We talked about the Iron Bowl, but there were so many great rivalry games on last night and yesterday. I mean, Texas and Texas A&M, that rivalry was rekindled after 13 years. And while I didn't think it was a particularly entertaining game, I thought Texas showed what they can't. Texas, to me, is an enigma. Their whole team is. Because at times they look like the most dominant team in the country with their incredible receiving core. When Quinn Ewers is on, it's beautiful. Their offensive line is great. I mean, they ran all over Texas A&M. But then you look up and they only win by 10 and they only scored 17 points because Quinn Ewers does what he does. He'll make it look great, and then he'll turn the ball over, and they'll kind of hit a little bit of a wall. But, that game was exciting to see it come back. Florida and Florida State. Florida continued the season on a hot streak. As far as the end of the season, get another win. Then a fight breaks out after the game, and Mike Norvell throws the Florida flag, which I thought was hilarious. Michigan and Ohio State, who had that on their bingo card of Michigan going in to Columbus and winning in the most ugly of ways, but man, they got Ryan Day's number. And now Ryan Day has to win a national championship. If he does not win the national championship this year, they might fire him. I'm telling you, because if you can't beat Michigan and then you go all in, all chips are on the table for this season, and you lose 2 games and you don't get to the national championship game, boosters are not going to be very happy with your performance, and especially when you keep losing to your biggest rival. But to me, the game of the day, South Carolina and Clemson. And I have stumped for South Carolina on this show. I said before the year on our preview show, Lenora Sellers is a breakout candidate. And my gosh, he put on the Superman cape yesterday, Graham. Unbelievable the run that he had to win that game, to score the game-winning touchdown. He had another incredible run for his first touchdown. He pretty much willed them to victory. They had a lot of self-inflicted wounds, a lot of turnovers, but that team is scrappy. They're gritty. They got a great defense, and that kid is already turning into a star. But next year, everyone, he's going to be absolutely incredible. He's getting better and better as a passer, but as a runner, to me, that dude is lightning. He is very, very fast, but he is a tank, and he doesn't shy away from contact. He runs really, really well through physicality. And I'm telling you, if they get in the playoff, they're a dark horse, because I think they got all the ingredients of a team that can win it all with the type of ball that they play. But before we get out of here, Graham, did you have any other thoughts on the other rivalry games other than, if you don't want your rival to plant the flag on your home field, maybe just don't lose to them? That's how you can prevent that. What do you make of all rivalry weekend before we get on out of here?
Yeah, I mean, we can have the discussion as to whether planting the flag is a good thing or not a good thing. But before the season started with the conference realignment and 12-team playoff, all we heard was that rivalries are going to be dead because they just weren't, because people were leaving, go to the other ones and stuff like that. If you did not watch any football on Saturday, you missed out. I mean, there was good football up and down the lineup. I mean, starting off with Michigan and Ohio State. And like we said, rivalry games are different. It does not matter what the record is for either team. Rivalry week is different because, not only is football on the line, not only are jobs on the line, but families are on the line. Friends, that's the kind of stuff that's on the line in rivalry.
Yeah.
And, man, yes, it's true that if you don't want people planting the flag, just win. But who was telling people to do that in the first place? Why is that I'll show them, I'll plant this flag. I'll plant the cheerleader flag that has no stake in it.
Yeah, I don't know who started that, but there were a few of the opposing teams that wanted to end that trend real quick. And I do know, you talked about a lot of people thought rivalry week would be dead. I don't think I've ever seen that many fights on rivalry weekend before. That just shows me that the pride in performance and the pride in your school do still matter, contrary to popular belief. And I don't condone that behavior, but I love to see that the guys care. I'll just leave it at that. But Graham, anything else before we get out of here?
I'm excited for championship week coming up.
Yeah.
You're looking forward to games on Friday and Saturday, but I think the tale will be whether Boise State handles business on Friday night or not. It's
versus UNLV, right?
Yeah, Mountain West. I think it's in Boise, so I mean a home field advantage for sure. if Boise State, takes care of business, there's an argument that they'll be one of the top 4 seeds because they'll be one of the top 4 conference champions, which will be a sight to see in itself. So I think the game of the watch of the week, and then you look at other games up and down the lineup. It's all going to be determined by the playoff committee as to what happens. But we're going to stay tuned. We're going to make sure that whenever things happen, we're going to break them down for you.
Absolutely, Graham. Well, thank you again for joining me today, brother. Always great to talk football with you, and we appreciate you for tuning in to the Pigskin Cafe. We're done with the regular season. I can't believe it. It has gone by in the blink of an eye, but we are not done posting content for this football season. We got a lot to discuss with playoff selection committee stuff coming up this upcoming Sunday, conference championship weekend, like Graham mentioned, and then ultimately the playoff game. So again, if you made it this far and you hadn't hit the subscribe button, then what the heck are you doing? Go ahead and hit it. Hit that notification bell. Leave a like on this video. Comment on whether Alabama should be in the playoffs or not. We would love to hear from you. Follow us on social media. We'll be back next week to recap and react to the college football playoff rankings and conference championship weekend. But the Pigskin Cafe is going to be closed for now. But until next week, chew on that. We appreciate you guys.